Crates are actually at a Pelham Rotary today, and we had a chance to meet and hear a presentation from a graduate of West Point. Dan Rice, a 1988 graduate of West Point, is the author of a new book, West Point Leadership. And Dan, tell us a bit about the book that you have just written, West Point Leadership, Profiles of Courage.
Oh, thanks for having us, Ken. And it was an honor to speak here at the Pelham Rotary. And the book is, I'm the co-author of the book along with Lieutenant Colonel John Vigna and a number of sub-authors who were great contributors to the book. We put this book together over 3 years really to highlight the contributions that West Point graduates have made throughout history, both in the military, but also in all other areas of the American experience. From politics, we've had 2 U.S. presidents, Grant and Eisenhower, countless senators, governors, and congressmen. But also, we've had West Point graduates leading in the private sector since the early 1800s. Most of the railroads were run by West Point graduates. And now some of the top corporations are quietly being run by West Point graduates, such as 7-Eleven. Joe DePinto, class of 86, is the CEO. Foot Locker, Ken Hicks, class of 74, is the CEO and chairman of Foot Locker. Johnson & Johnson, Alex Kowarski, class of 82. Mercedes-Benz USA is Steve Cannon, class of 86. So West Point graduates are leading not only in the military, but in business and academia and in politics. And it's really because the leadership that's trained at West Point to cadets is transferable across all areas of the American experience.
Absolutely. And you mentioned today the experience of West Point cadets. I think they say it's 47 months of training from when they come in as plebes till that wonderful graduation day at Michie Stadium. What are some of the steps along the way at West Point that the students, the cadets, learn leadership?
Well, I think one of the things that we really learned in putting the book together was one of the ties that binds, so to speak, is that they all start as plebes. We all started as plebes. Eisenhower started as a plebe. Ulysses S. Grant started as a plebe. You really learn humility. You learn how to follow. You learn to do your job. You learn responsibility. And that's been consistent since West Point was founded in 1802. And even today, you know, when I spoke with generals, astronauts, CEOs, senators, and I asked them to be in the book, the vast majority initially said no. They said they were honored to be considered, but they didn't deserve to be in a book with Patton and Schwarzkopf and Eisenhower. So I think the military as a whole, you learn humility. And that's one of the downsides, is that the military usually isn't very good at marketing and self-promotion, so none of the people wanted to be in the book. And I had to convince each of them to be in the book that it was the best interest of West Point to promote those that have been so successful, such as themselves.
And is there a favorite interview that you had when you were researching the book?
There were so many that were just amazing to experience, and to be around these people and to have their authorized biography to write with them. I learned more about West Point than I ever thought I'd know. But in particular, a few of them, General Lloyd Austin, who's currently the CENTCOM commander. You know, this is a man who was born in Thomasville, Georgia, African American during segregation, and we can't really imagine what that was like for him to live in a segregated South. But that's where he grew up. 100 years before him, in the same town of Thomasville, Georgia, a slave grew up, Henry O. Flipper, who became the first African-American graduate of West Point. So the combination of those two, going from a slave born in Thomasville, Georgia, to the current CENTCOM commander, I just thought was a really interesting connection that we made. And hearing how the current CENTCOM commander, who he rose to 4-star status, he was the first African-American to command an army at war when he commanded the Iraq War. Now he's the commander of all of CENTCOM. But that is really a great kind of a small glimpse into the West Point experience from the African-American experience. And as you know, the military was really progressive in integrating African-Americans with President Truman integrated African-Americans into the military far before American society had the civil rights movement. But West Point, going back to the 1800s, was graduating African-Americans such as Henry O. Flipper. And so just a really interesting factoid.
And you mentioned how many West Point graduates have been successful after their military careers in business, heads of quite a number of notable U.S. companies. Is there something, what will a business person learn by reading some of the profiles that you have in your book, West Point Leadership?
Well, we tried to weave into each story certain leadership principles and certain leadership examples that each of them had experienced. So Tony Guzzi, who is the Chief Executive Officer of EMCOR, which is a Fortune 500 company with 26,000 employees, now he really talks about the dawning of what servant-style leadership was to him. And he learned that at West Point, where he finally got it, where it dawned on him that his role as a leader is to support his subordinates. And if he supports them, then it's in his self-interest, then they'll be successful. So that story is woven in throughout his. Joe DePinto, he is the CEO of 7-Eleven, and a lot of Americans are familiar with him because he was on The Undercover Boss. But that really exemplified his attitude of learning the business from the ground up. He went on the show Undercover Boss and went as an hourly employee into the stores, and he did it really to learn more about what it was like to see from the ground level. And a lot of changes occurred from his experience on The Undercover Boss. But that's really the Steve Cannon's the CEO of Mercedes. And I went to Fashion Week, and I asked if he was going to be coming to Fashion Week because they're a major sponsor. And the answer that the woman running Fashion Week said was, well, he keeps a low profile. He comes in and he leaves, but he doesn't want any fanfare about himself. And that's really the kind of the selfless service of leading by example. And it's not all about the CEO. It's all about the employees and giving them what they need to succeed. And I think I saw that throughout the CEOs, that they really focus on what they can do for their employees, not what their employees can do for them.
And Dan, tell us a little bit about yourself. You were in the Ranger tab. The Purple Heart in your service in the first Iraq War. And then you went on to Kellogg at Northwestern and to found a successful energy company. Tell us a little bit about your career.
Well, I was originally commissioned in 1988 after graduating from West Point. And I went to Kellogg in class of 2000 for my MBA. I actually served in the second Iraq War. I was in 2004 when I returned to service. The New York National Guard was heading off to war, and so I volunteered to join that group, and we went off to Crete, Iraq. And after that, I've founded several companies. One was a company that bought up a private equity fund that bought Iraqi factories to renovate them. Another was an energy company that I currently run to provide solar battery hybrid solutions for special operations units in the field, basically to reduce fuel. And another was a company we co-founded at West Point called the Fair Leader Development Group. And that group takes the principles taught at West Point to cadets, and it brings them to executives. So we created this company within the historic Thayer Hotel at West Point, and we now bring chief executive officers and their teams from around the world for training at West Point. All of our instructors are PhDs in their respective fields. We have generals, we have retired colonels, and they all have leadership backgrounds and experience and the credentials to back them. And we now have Procter & Gamble, 7-Eleven, Mercedes-Benz, General Electric. They're all bringing their teams from around the world for leadership training, understanding what it's like to be taught the military leadership style. And it's been incredibly successful. We're thrilled with the growth of the company, and that is now probably one of the premier leadership institutes in the world for corporate executives.
Well, that's great. And Dan Rice, tell us a little bit about where your book is available, West Point Leadership Profiles of Courage.
Oh, thank you. It's available on Amazon.com, and it's been selling very well. We look forward to also the recent launch of the ebook, which is available on iTunes, and that now is really selling around the world since it's obviously easier to sell. But so it's on iTunes in the ebook form, and the hard copy is available on Amazon.com.
That's great. Dan Rice, a pleasure. Thank you for visiting Pelham Rotary, and thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you. Go Army, beat Navy.